The silence stretched across the operations center like a funeral shroud. 23 minutes had passed since the last transmission from SEAL Team 7. On the massive tactical display, 6 red dots blinked ominously in the Kandahar Mountains, 6 American warriors trapped in a nightmare scenario that nobody saw coming. The intelligence had been wrong, dead wrong. What was supposed to be a routine extraction of a high-value target had turned into the kind of clusterfuck that ended careers and filled body bags. Colonel Marcus Reed stared at the screen, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the command console until his knuckles turned white. 37 years in the Army, and he'd never felt this helpless. The SEAL team was pinned down in a narrow valley, surrounded by an estimated 200 Taliban fighters who had materialized from the mountain caves like ghosts. Apache helicopters couldn't reach them. The elevation was too high, and the anti-aircraft fire too intense. The Predator drones had been shot down one by one, their feeds cutting to black static. Even the AC-130 Spectre gunship had been forced to retreat after taking heavy damage from surface-to-air missiles. "Sir, we're running out of options," Major Stevens whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of computers and radio chatter. "The terrain is impossible. The weather window is closing. If we don't extract them in the next 40 minutes." Reed didn't need him to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room knew what happened to Americans captured by the Taliban. The thought of it made his stomach churn. These weren't just soldiers. They were his soldiers, men he'd trained, men whose families he knew personally. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had a baby daughter he'd never seen. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was getting married next month. The youngest, Petty Officer Kim, was barely 22 years old. The radio crackled with desperate transmissions from the valley below. "Overwatch, this is Neptune 7, taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support. Repeat, immediate air support." The voice was strained, punctuated by the sharp crack of gunfire and the thunderous boom of explosions. Then nothing but static. Reed closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. In all his years of command, he had never faced a situation this dire. The Pentagon had already written off the mission. The Joint Chiefs were preparing damage control statements. But somewhere in that godforsaken valley, 6 of America's finest were fighting for their lives, counting on him to bring them home. That's when the unexpected transmission came through the comms. A voice he didn't recognize, calm and steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Control, this is Warthog 27, requesting permission to enter the AO." The room fell silent. Reed looked around at his staff, confusion written across every face. Warthog 27. There were no A-10s scheduled for this operation. Hell, there were no A-10s even stationed at Bagram anymore. The aging Thunderbolt II aircraft, affectionately known as Warthogs for their ungainly appearance, had been gradually phased out of operations in favor of more modern multi-role fighters. Most pilots considered them relics, slow and vulnerable in the age of advanced surface-to-air missiles. "Control, Warthog 27, do you copy?" The voice came again, distinctly female, with a slight southern accent that somehow managed to sound both professional and reassuring. "I'm 20 minutes out from the target area, full combat load, ready to provide close air support." Reed grabbed the microphone. "Warthog 27, this is Control. What's your status and authorization for this mission? You're not on our flight roster." A brief pause, filled only by the static of radio waves bouncing off mountain peaks. "Control, I'm Captain Alina Vasquez, 355th Fighter Squadron. I was running a routine training mission when I monitored your emergency frequency. Thought you might need some help." The colonel exchanged glances with Major Stevens, who was already pulling up Captain Vasquez's service record on his computer screen. What he found made his eyebrows shoot up in surprise. Alina Ghost Vasquez, 29 years old, former Air National Guard pilot with over 800 combat hours in Iraq and Afghanistan. She'd been flying A-10s for 7 years, longer than most pilots stayed in the cockpit of any aircraft. Her record was impressive but unremarkable. No disciplinary actions, no commendations that stood out, just solid workmanlike performance that had earned her the nickname Ghost for her ability to appear and disappear from missions without fanfare. Captain Vasquez, Reed said slowly, this is an extremely hot LZ. We've lost 2 Apache and 3 drones already. The terrain is brutal, visibility is near zero, and there are confirmed SAMs in the area. Are you sure you want to get involved in this? The response came back immediately without hesitation. Sir, I've got 6 Americans down there who need help. That's all I need to know. Reed felt something stir in his chest. Hope, maybe, or just desperation disguised as optimism. He looked at the tactical display again, studying the terrain features, the known enemy positions, the narrow corridors where his men were trapped. It was a suicide mission for any aircraft, but especially for an A-10. The Warthog was built for close air support, designed to fly low and slow, absorbing punishment while delivering devastating firepower. But in these mountains, with this level of anti-aircraft threat, it would be like flying into a meat grinder. 2-7, be advised that the target area is a valley approximately 800 meters wide, surrounded by peaks reaching 14,000 feet. Enemy forces are dug in on both ridgelines with heavy machine guns, RPGs, and at least 2 confirmed SAM sites. Our people are trapped at the bottom of the valley with minimal cover. Previous aircraft have been unable to provide effective support due to the terrain masking and high threat level. Static filled the airwaves for several seconds. Reed found himself holding his breath, waiting for Captain Vasquez to acknowledge the impossible odds and turn back. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. No one would blame her for refusing such a suicidal mission. Instead, her voice came back steady as granite. Copy that, Control. Understand the tactical situation. 2-7 is inbound, ETA 15 minutes. Request you paint the target area with smoke if possible and keep our boys' heads down. This is going to get loud. Major Stevens looked up from his computer screen, his face pale. Sir, I've been reviewing Captain Vasquez's flight history. She's not exactly what you'd call a standout pilot. No major incidents, but no major victories either. Her evaluations describe her as competent but unremarkable. She's never led a major combat mission solo. Reed studied the tactical display, watching the small blue icon representing Warthog 2-7 creep across the digital map toward the red zone where his men were trapped. In 15 minutes, Captain Elena Ghost Vasquez would either become a hero or another name on the wall. The problem was, he had no other choice. She was the only asset in range, the only pilot crazy enough to attempt what everyone else had deemed impossible. All right, people, Reed announced to the operations center, his voice carrying the weight of command that had gotten him through 3 decades of military service. We've got an A-10 inbound to support Neptune 7. I want every intelligence analyst working on threat assessment updates. Communications. Establish direct contact with the ground team and brief them on the incoming air support. Weather. Give me updated wind patterns and visibility reports for the target valley. And somebody find out everything there is to know about Captain Elena Vasquez, because in 14 minutes, she's going to be the most important person in Afghanistan. The valley where SEAL Team 7 fought for their lives was a geographical nightmare carved by ancient glaciers and shaped by centuries of wind and water. Steep granite walls rose on both sides like the jaws of some primordial beast, creating a natural amphitheater of death. At its narrowest point, the valley was barely 600 meters wide, with the rocky floor littered with boulders that provided minimal cover for the trapped Americans. The Taliban had chosen their ambush site well. It was a textbook example of terrain that favored the defender, a place where superior numbers and elevation could negate the technological advantages that American forces usually enjoyed. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez pressed his back against a large boulder, feeling the sharp crack of bullets striking stone just inches from his head. His M4 carbine was running low on ammunition, and his radio headset crackled with the desperate voices of his teammates scattered across the valley floor. To his left, Lieutenant Commander Hayes was trying to treat Petty Officer Kim's shoulder wound, while simultaneously returning fire at muzzle flashes high up on the eastern ridge. The kid was pale and shaking, but still conscious, a good sign, considering the amount of blood soaking through his uniform. "Rodriguez, how's our ammo situation?" Hayes called out, his voice barely audible over the constant din of gunfire echoing off the valley walls. "Not good, sir. Maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire left if we're lucky." Rodriguez ejected an empty magazine and slammed in his last full one, the metallic click swallowed by another burst of machine gun fire from above. "These bastards have us bracketed pretty good. Every time we move, they light us up." Chief Petty Officer Barnes, the team's senior enlisted man and most experienced operator, was crouched behind a shallow depression about 50 meters away. At 42, he was old for a SEAL, but his calm demeanor under fire was exactly what the team needed in this moment. "Control, this is Neptune 7 actual," he spoke into his radio, his voice steady despite their dire situation. "We're taking effective fire from multiple positions on both ridgelines. Estimate 150 to 200 enemy combatants with crew-served weapons and RPGs. We need immediate air support, or we're not walking out of here." The response from the operations center came back filled with static and interference from the surrounding mountains. "Neptune 7, control copies. Be advised we have air support inbound, ETA 10 minutes. Warthog 27 will be providing close air support. Can you mark your position with smoke?" Barnes felt a flicker of hope. Warthogs were legendary among ground forces for their ability to provide precise, devastating fire support in close quarters. The aircraft's GAU-8 Avenger cannon could turn enemy positions into scrap metal in seconds, and its pilots were trained specifically for this type of mission. "Copy, control. We'll mark our position yellow smoke in. Mark. Now." Rodriguez pulled the pin on a yellow smoke grenade and tossed it into the center of their defensive position. Bright yellow smoke began billowing up from the valley floor, providing a clear reference point for the inbound aircraft while also giving away their exact location to every Taliban fighter in the area. It was a calculated risk. The smoke would help their air support, but it would also draw more accurate fire from the enemy. As if on cue, the intensity of incoming fire doubled. Bullets struck all around them, sending up sprays of rock dust and metal fragments. An RPG streaked down from the western ridge, impacting 20 meters away and showering them with debris. Hayes grabbed Kim and dragged him deeper behind their boulder, pressing a field dressing against the young SEAL's wounded shoulder. "Stay with me, Kim," Hayes whispered urgently. "Air support's coming. We just need to hold on for 10 more minutes." But 10 minutes felt like an eternity when surrounded by an army of fighters who had home field advantage and nothing to lose. The Taliban had turned this valley into a killing field, and they were methodically working to eliminate every American trapped inside it. Captain Elena Vasquez felt the familiar weight of the A-10 Thunderbolt II beneath her as she banked south toward the mountains. The aircraft responded to her inputs with the solid, predictable handling that had made her fall in love with the Warthog in the first place. Unlike the sleek, high-tech fighters that dominated modern air forces, the A-10 was built like a flying tank, ugly, slow, and absolutely devastating when employed correctly. Its twin General Electric TF-34 turbofan engines mounted high on the fuselage gave it a distinctive sound that ground troops learned to love and enemies learned to fear. She had been flying routine training maneuvers over the relatively peaceful Helmand province when she first heard the emergency transmissions on the guard frequency. SEAL Team 7 was in serious trouble, and from the sound of the radio chatter, they were running out of time fast. Elena didn't hesitate. She immediately changed course and began the 40-minute flight to their location, pushing her aircraft to its maximum cruise speed while calculating fuel consumption and weapons employment options. Now, as the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains rose ahead of her cockpit canopy, Alina reviewed everything she knew about the tactical situation. 6 SEALs trapped in a narrow valley, surrounded by an estimated 200 Taliban fighters with heavy weapons and surface-to-air missiles. Multiple aircraft had already been lost or damaged attempting to provide support. It was the kind of mission that would be analyzed in staff colleges for years to come, assuming anyone survived to write the after-action report. Control, Warthog 27 passing Checkpoint Alpha, ETA target area 7 minutes, she reported, her voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. Request final threat update and friendly position confirmation. The response from Colonel Reed came back immediately. 27, Control. Latest intelligence indicates at least 2 active SAM sites, probable SA-7s or SA-14s, positioned on the high ground overlooking the target valley. Friendly forces are marked with yellow smoke at the valley floor, approximately center mass. Be advised that multiple rotary wing aircraft have been engaged and forced to withdraw due to the high threat environment. Alina acknowledged the transmission while studying her moving map display. The target valley was still 5 minutes away, but she was already beginning her mental preparation for what would likely be the most challenging mission of her career. The SA-7 and SA-14 surface-to-air missiles mentioned by Control were older Soviet-era systems, but they were still deadly to low-flying aircraft. The trick would be to stay fast and unpredictable, using the mountain terrain to mask her approach and deny the missile operators a clean shot. Copy Control. 27 is configured with mixed ordnance, Mavericks, cluster bombs, and a full load of 30mm. I'll make my initial pass from the north, keeping the sun at my back. She began her descent from 15,000 feet, threading the A-10 between towering peaks that rose like ancient sentinels from the Afghan landscape. At this altitude, the air was thin and cold, requiring constant attention to engine parameters and aerodynamic performance. The Warthog wasn't built for high-altitude operations, but Alina had learned to coax every bit of performance from her aircraft through years of experience flying in the mountains of Afghanistan. As she approached the target area, Alina could see the yellow smoke rising from the valley floor like a beacon of desperation. Even from 5 miles away, the muzzle flashes from enemy weapons were clearly visible against the shadowed walls of the canyon. The SEALs were completely surrounded, caught in a crossfire that would have overwhelmed a much larger force. Alina took a deep breath and made her final preparations for combat. In 4 minutes, she would either save 6 American lives or die trying. There was no middle ground, no room for half measures or hesitation. This was what she had trained for during countless hours in simulators and practice ranges. This was why she had chosen to fly the A-10 instead of pursuing assignments in more glamorous aircraft. Neptune 7, this is Warthog 27 on station. I see your yellow smoke and have visual on multiple enemy positions. Keep your heads down, boys. The cavalry has arrived. The first glimpse Chief Petty Officer Barnes got of Warthog 27 was just a dark speck against the morning sky, barely visible through the haze of gunpowder smoke and rock dust that filled the valley. For a moment, he wondered if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The aircraft seemed impossibly small and fragile compared to the massive mountains surrounding them. But then he heard it, the distinctive whine of twin turbofan engines echoing off the canyon walls, growing louder with each passing second. There she is, Barnes called out to his team, pointing skyward. Our ride's here. The A-10 was still several miles out, but Alina Vasquez was already working to analyze the tactical situation from her elevated perspective. The valley spread out below her like a three-dimensional chessboard, with friendly and enemy positions clearly defined by muzzle flashes and the rising column of yellow smoke. She could see that the SEALs were clustered near the center of the valley floor, using a collection of large boulders for cover while taking fire from at least 6 different positions on the surrounding ridgelines. Control, Warthog 27 beginning tactical assessment, she reported, banking the A-10 into a wide circle to get a better view of the battlefield. I count multiple enemy positions on both ridgelines, with what appears to be crew-served weapons and RPGs. Friendlies are in a tight defensive perimeter, approximately 300 meters from the nearest enemy position. The proximity of friendly and enemy forces was the biggest challenge Alina faced. In ideal circumstances, close air support missions were conducted with clear separation between opposing forces, allowing pilots to employ their weapons without risk of fratricide. But this situation was anything but ideal. The SEALs and Taliban fighters were so close together that a single targeting error could be catastrophic. 2-7. Control copies. Be advised that friendly forces are critically low on ammunition and taking casualties. We need immediate suppression of enemy positions, but obviously fratricide is a major concern given the proximity of forces. Alina acknowledged the transmission while continuing her tactical orbit above the valley. She could see muzzle flashes winking like deadly fireflies from positions all along both ridgelines, and the yellow smoke marking the SEAL position was being shredded by the constant crossfire. Time was running out fast. If she didn't act soon, there wouldn't be anyone left to rescue. Neptune 7, Warthog 27, she called directly to the ground team. I need you to mark the nearest enemy position with whatever you've got. Laser designator, smoke, mirror flash, anything that will help me distinguish friend from foe. Barnes grabbed his laser designator and trained it on a machine gun position that had been particularly troublesome, located on the eastern ridge about 200 meters from their location. 2-7, Neptune 7. I'm lasing the target now, machine gun nest in the rocks, about halfway up the eastern slope. Alina picked up the laser designation immediately on her targeting pod display. The enemy position was clearly visible, tucked into a natural rock formation that provided excellent protection from ground fire but would be vulnerable to attack from above. It was a textbook close air support target, but the margin for error was razor-thin. Neptune 7, I have your laser. Confirm you want me to engage the position on the eastern ridge, approximately 200 meters from your location. That's affirmative, 2-7. That gun's been chewing us up for the last 20 minutes. If you can take it out, it'll give us some breathing room. Alina lined up for her first attack run, descending through 8,000 feet as she approached the valley from the north. The A-10's targeting systems locked onto the laser-designated position, and she armed her GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the massive 7-barrel rotary cannon that formed the heart of the Warthog's devastating firepower. Each of the 30 shells in the cannon's magazine was the size of a milk bottle, designed to penetrate armor and destroy fortified positions with devastating effect. As she entered the valley, Alina felt the familiar sensation of flying into a shooting gallery. Tracer rounds began streaking past her canopy from multiple positions, and her radar warning receiver lit up with threat indicators. Somewhere in the surrounding mountains, enemy fighters were tracking her with surface-to-air missiles, waiting for the perfect moment to fire. But Alina's focus was laser-sharp, concentrated solely on the targeting display showing the enemy machine gun position. At 1,500 feet above ground level and closing fast, she squeezed the trigger and felt the A-10 shudder as the GAU-8 cannon came to life. The sound was indescribable, like the roar of an angry dragon mixed with the tearing of heavy canvas. For 2 seconds, the cannon fired at a rate of 4,200 rounds per minute, sending nearly 150 rounds of 30 death into the enemy position. The effect on the Taliban machine gun nest was instantaneous and devastating. The carefully constructed rock fortification simply disintegrated under the impact of armor-piercing shells, sending debris flying in all directions. The machine gun fell silent immediately, its crew eliminated in the space of a heartbeat. "Holy shit," Rodriguez whispered, watching the destruction from his position behind the boulder. "Did you see that?" She took out that whole position with one pass. But Alina's work was far from finished. As she pulled out of her attack dive and climbed back to altitude, her radar warning receiver began screaming. Somewhere on the ridgeline, a SAM operator had achieved missile lock and was preparing to fire. 2-7 control, brake left, brake left. We're tracking a missile launch from your 7 o'clock position. Alina didn't hesitate. She threw the A-10 into a punishing left turn while simultaneously deploying chaff and flare countermeasures. The aircraft groaned under the G-forces, but the Warthog was built to absorb punishment. Behind her, she could see the white trail of a surface-to-air missile streaking through the space she had occupied just seconds before. The missile, decoyed by her countermeasures, exploded harmlessly against the valley wall. But Alina knew that the SAM site was still active, still tracking her every move. She would have to deal with it before she could continue providing support to the trapped SEALs. Control 2-7. I'm taking SAM fire from a position on the western ridge. Can you get me a precise location on that launcher? Back in the operations center, intelligence analysts were frantically working to pinpoint the source of the missile launch. Satellite imagery and signals intelligence were being analyzed in real time, but the process was taking precious minutes that Alina didn't have. 2-7 control, working on precise coordinates for the SAM site. In the meantime, we show multiple additional enemy positions that are still engaging our people on the ground. Alina looked down at the valley floor, where muzzle flashes continued to blink like deadly stars around the yellow smoke marking the SEAL position. Despite the destruction of the machine gun nest, the Taliban fighters were maintaining their pressure on the trapped Americans. She could see impacts all around the boulder field where the SEALs were sheltering, and it was clear that their situation was still desperate. Neptune 7, Warthog 2-7. I'm going to make another pass on the western ridge. Can you identify the most threatening positions from your perspective? Barnes keyed his radio while bullets continued to crack overhead. 2-7, we've got at least 3 positions on the western slope that are really giving us problems. There's an RPG team about 400 meters northwest of our position, and what looks like another machine gun setup about 300 meters due west. Alina acknowledged the transmission and began maneuvering for her second attack run. This time, she would approach from the east, using the rising sun to backlight her aircraft and make it harder for enemy gunners to track her visually. It was an old fighter pilot trick that had been used since World War II, and it was just as effective in the mountains of Afghanistan as it had been in the skis over Europe 60 years earlier. As she lined up for the attack, Alina's thoughts briefly wandered to her training instructors back at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. They had always emphasized that close air support was as much an art as a science, requiring split-second decisions and absolute trust between pilot and ground forces. The margin for error was minimal, and the consequences of mistakes were measured in American lives. Neptune 7, 2-7 inbound from the east. Keep those laser designators active. I'm going to need precise target marking for this pass. The second attack run was even more intense than the first. As Alina descended into the valley, it seemed like every Taliban fighter on both ridgelines opened fire simultaneously. Tracer rounds filled the air around her aircraft, creating a deadly light show against the morning sky. Her radar warning receiver was screaming constantly now, indicating multiple threats trying to achieve missile lock. But Alina's focus remained absolute. She could see the RPG position that Barnes had identified, partially concealed behind a rocky outcropping on the western slope. The enemy fighters had chosen their location well. It provided excellent cover from ground fire while offering clear fields of fire down into the valley. Taking it out would require precision shooting and nerves of steel. At 1,200 feet above ground level, Alina opened fire with the GAU-8 cannon once again. The stream of 30 shells walked across the enemy position like deadly rain, pulverizing rock and flesh with equal efficiency. The RPG team simply vanished, erased from existence in the space of 2 seconds. As she pulled out of the dive, Alina felt something slam into her aircraft with tremendous force. The A-10 lurched violently to the right, and warning lights began flashing across her instrument panel. She had taken a hit, either from small arms fire or shrapnel from an exploding RPG round. 2-7 taking fire. I've got damage to the right engine and hydraulic systems, she reported, fighting to maintain control of the aircraft as it tried to roll into an unrecoverable spin. In the operations center, Colonel Reed felt his heart sink. They couldn't afford to lose their only close air support asset, especially not when the mission was just beginning to show signs of success. 2-7, what's your aircraft status? Can you continue the mission? Alina ran through her emergency procedures with practiced efficiency, shutting down the damaged right engine and switching to backup hydraulic systems. The A-10 was famous for its ability to absorb battle damage and keep flying, but there were limits to what any aircraft could endure. She still had partial control, but her performance was significantly degraded. Control 2-7. I've lost my right engine, but I still have flight control authority. Fuel consumption is higher than normal, but I've got enough gas to continue the mission for another 15 minutes. On the ground, the SEALs had witnessed the aircraft taking battle damage, and Barnes keyed his radio immediately. 2-7, Neptune 7. Are you okay up there? We saw you take a hit. Alina's response came back calm and steady, despite the fact that she was flying a damaged aircraft over hostile territory with limited fuel and multiple enemy SAM sites still active. Neptune 7, 2-7 is still mission capable. I've got one engine down, but this old bird was built to take a beating. Let's finish this job. The third attack run would prove to be the most challenging yet. With only one operational engine, Alina's aircraft was slower and less maneuverable, making it an easier target for enemy gunners. But it also meant that she could spend more time over the target area, providing more precise fire support for the trapped SEALs. Control 2-7 beginning attack run number 3. I'm going to work over the remaining positions on the eastern ridge, then see if I can locate that SAM site that's been tracking me. As she descended into the valley once again, Alina reflected on how much the tactical situation had changed in just 10 minutes. Her first 2 attacks had eliminated several key enemy positions and provided the SEALs with some breathing room, but there were still dozens of Taliban fighters dug in throughout the surrounding mountains. Each attack run was becoming more dangerous as the enemy adapted their tactics and concentrated their fire on her aircraft. But giving up was not an option. 6 American warriors were counting on her to keep fighting, to keep providing the fire support they needed to survive until reinforcements could arrive. Alina had spent 7 years training for missions exactly like this one, and she wasn't about to let her brothers-in-arms down when they needed her most. The A-10 shuddered as she fired the GAU-8 cannon for the 3rd time, sending another stream of 30 shells into an enemy machine gun position. The return fire was immediate and intense, but Alina had learned to anticipate the enemy's reactions. She jinked left and right, using the A-10's surprisingly agile handling to avoid the worst of the defensive fire while continuing to engage targets of opportunity. As she climbed out of the valley after her 3rd attack run, Alina noticed that the volume of enemy fire had decreased significantly. Her systematic destruction of key positions was beginning to have a cumulative effect, degrading the Taliban's ability to maintain their encirclement of the SEAL team. For the first time since the mission began, there was genuine reason for hope. Neptune 7, Warthog 2-7, how's your situation down there? Are you able to move to better cover? Barnes surveyed the battlefield from his position behind the boulder. The constant rain of enemy fire had decreased to sporadic bursts, and several of the positions that had been giving them the most trouble were now silent. 2-7, Neptune 7. The pressure's definitely off. You've knocked out at least half of the positions that were engaging us. We might be able to bound to better cover if you can keep them suppressed. Alina checked her fuel gauge and weapons status. She had burned through more than half of her 30 ammunition, and her fuel consumption with only one engine was higher than normal. Time was becoming a critical factor. She needed to maximize the effectiveness of her remaining attacks while the SEALs attempted to improve their tactical position. Copy, Neptune 7. I'll make one more gun run on the western ridge, then orbit overhead to provide overwatch while you move. Be advised that my fuel situation is getting tight, so we need to make this count. As she lined up for what might be her final attack run, Alina felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Everything that happened in the next few minutes would determine whether 6 American heroes went home to their families or became another tragic statistic in the global war on terror. The margin for error was zero, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. Chief Petty Officer Barnes gathered his team for what would be their first tactical movement since the ambush began. Petty Officer Kim's shoulder wound had been stabilized, but he was still pale from blood loss and would need help moving across the rocky terrain. Lieutenant Commander Hayes had taken shrapnel in his left leg during the earlier fighting, though he insisted the injury wasn't serious enough to slow him down. "Listen up," Barnes called out, his voice barely audible over the intermittent gunfire echoing through the valley. 2-7 is going to make one more gun run to suppress the remaining positions. Then we're going to bound by teams to that rocky outcropping about 50 meters south of our current position. It's not much, but it'll give us better fields of fire and more protection from the high ground. Rodriguez checked his ammunition one more time, 4 magazines left plus a handful of grenades. Not much to work with, but it would have to do. What's the plan after we reach the new position, Chief? Barnes looked up at the sky, where Alina's damaged A-10 was beginning its final attack run. Black smoke was streaming from the aircraft's right engine, but it was still flying and fighting. We hold what we've got and wait for reinforcements. Control says they've got birds inbound from Bagram, but it's going to be at least another 20 minutes. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours in their current situation. Despite Alina's successful attacks, there were still dozens of Taliban fighters positioned throughout the surrounding mountains. The SEALs had bought themselves some time and breathing room, but they were still outnumbered by at least 30-1. Alina began her fourth and final gun run from the northwest, diving toward the western ridge, where several enemy positions continued to engage the SEAL team. Her damaged aircraft responded sluggishly to control inputs, and the single operating engine was running hot from the increased workload. Warning lights flickered across her instrument panel, but she ignored them all. There would be time to worry about mechanical problems after the mission was complete. Neptune 7, 2-7 inbound hot. Get ready to move as soon as I finish this pass. The GAU-8 cannon roared to life one last time, sending its deadly stream of 30 shells into the remaining enemy positions. Alina walked the fire across 3 separate Taliban fighting positions, methodically destroying each one with the precision that came from years of training and experience. As she pulled out of the dive, the volume of enemy fire decreased dramatically. Her systematic destruction of key positions had finally broken the back of the Taliban's defensive network. "Go, go, go!" Barnes shouted, leading his team in a desperate sprint across 50 meters of open ground toward their new defensive position. The movement was incredibly dangerous. They would be exposed to fire from multiple directions, but staying in their original position was no longer viable. Alina orbited overhead, watching the SEAL team's movement through her targeting pod while simultaneously scanning for any remaining enemy positions that might threaten the vulnerable Americans. Her fuel gauge was approaching critical levels, but she pushed the concern from her mind. The mission wasn't complete until all 6 SEALs were safely extracted. The team reached their new position without taking casualties, diving behind a cluster of large boulders that provided better protection from multiple angles. From here, They could establish overlapping fields of fire and make any Taliban assault much more costly. It wasn't perfect, but it was a significant improvement over their previous position. 2-7, Neptune 7 in position. We've got much better cover now and good fields of fire in all directions. You did one hell of a job up there. Alina felt a surge of pride at the praise from the experienced SEAL team leader, but she knew the mission was far from over. Her attacks had degraded the enemy's capability and given the ground team some breathing room, but there were still hostile forces throughout the area. The SEALs would need continued air support until reinforcements arrived. Neptune 7, 2-7 copies. Be advised that I'm getting low on fuel and will need to return to base soon, but I'll stay on station as long as possible to provide overwatch. In the operations center back at Bagram Airfield, Colonel Reed was coordinating the rescue operation with renewed optimism. Alina's successful close air support mission had transformed a hopeless situation into one where extraction was actually possible. Additional aircraft were already en route, 2 Apache attack helicopters, and a combat search and rescue team with extraction capabilities. 2-7 Control. Outstanding work out there. We've got additional assets inbound to your location, 2 Apache and a CSAR bird, ETA 12 minutes. Can you maintain station until they arrive? Alina checked her fuel gauge one more time. The mathematics were tight, but manageable if she was.